Hey, this is Kelsey Not Live. I am Kelsey Macke, and this is Phase 3 of the Revise Along Challenge. Hey guys, thank you so much for coming back to my channel. I am very excited today to be sharing with you part 3 of the Revise Along Challenge, which is basically an Instagram challenge that I created to walk you through all of the steps of my revision process. So basically, Phase 3 is taking everything to the next level. If you have been with me through Phase 1 and 2, then you know that we've taken care of a lot of stuff up until this point, and Phase 3 is no break. Phase 3 is still quite a lot of heavy lifting. So I wanted to walk you through the Phase 3 challenge card, which the challenge cards again are, they look just like this. This is the Phase 3 one, and it is up on my Instagram page. So Phase 3 is going to use the following 8 terms, which you can use to guide your Instagram posts as you are in this phase. So I'm going to tell you what they all mean to me. As always, please remember that your mileage may vary, and this process is basically just me telling you what I'm doing, but it is by no means the only way to approach revisions. Also, it's important to note as we get to Phase 3 that this doesn't mean that Phase 1 and 2 are totally done. I like to think of adding a phase as sort of like adding a new layer of work and not necessarily stepping in and taking the place of Phase 1 or Phase 2. It's really more of an in addition to kind of situation. So Phase 3 includes words such as tension, externals, internals, show, tell, expectations, voices, and secondary. So here's what these terms mean to me as I step into this part of revising. Okay, so last time we were talking about revisions, we were talking about moving around boulders, rocks, and pebbles, which is how I break apart my tasks into the biggest tasks, medium-sized tasks, and the smallest tasks. So at this point, my list of big items has been mostly moved around, and this is typically structural stuff. These are the biggest things that will have impacts on the story structure itself, on conflicts, on resolution, on arcs for individual characters, and things like that. So now it's time to focus on some of the things that are on the medium-sized list and things that were on the boulders list that were basically not about structure. So here's what that means. I'm going to be checking for depth in many of these areas. So tension, I'm going to need to work on making sure that there is tension, not just in every chapter, and not just in like the story overall, but that there is tension in every scene in some way. This means that every scene is going to be pulling my main character closer to her goal or pushing her farther away. And in order for me to keep everything tense, I have to keep that in mind as I move through the story. So I'm going to be working on making sure that each scene has enough pressure to give the reader a reason to keep turning the page. I want them to turn the page because they are excited to see what is about to happen to her, or they are dreading what's about to happen to her. But I want them to have a feeling about everything that happens to her in the book. Secondary has to do with secondary characters and secondary storylines. I want to make sure at this stage in the game that I have given some priority to checking on all of my characters and making sure that they all have purpose that is distinct and that they're all necessary. I have been in a situation before where a character was cut from my manuscript, and it was very sad and scary. And while I think that I could have certainly fought to keep that character, the reason the character was expendable was because I didn't write that character with a real purpose. So I'm trying to be much, much better about making sure that every character on the page should be there for a reason. So I'm going to check in on them. As far as the secondary plot lines, that is a similar situation. I want to make sure that every secondary plot line has just as many ups and downs and satisfying like twists and turns and resolution as the primary storyline. So this is a chance for me to go to my post-it wall, which if you didn't see my post-it wall, you can watch the phase 2 video. But I want to go back to my post-it wall and I want to check on those B storylines and make sure that those storylines are also satisfying. And if I haven't given those B storylines attention at this point, it's a great time to do it right now. Externals and internals. So the externals are going to be all the things that are outside of the character, and this is going to be how I check in on making sure that I'm adding interesting descriptions and positions in scenes, physical positions. Where are the people standing, sitting, moving? What does the world around them look like? Sometimes I can forget to describe the scene and what it actually looks like, but also I want to make sure that I'm checking for other representations of what a place is, not just what it looks like, but also sounds and smells and anything else that relates to the senses. I want to make sure that I'm describing my characters. I want to make sure that I'm describing them while avoiding some of those cliches that sometimes can slip into my writing. And I also want to make sure that I'm describing them clearly. I want to make sure that I'm not defaulting to certain language. I want to make sure that every time I describe someone, I'm being very specific with what I am describing and how I'm describing it. Internals. This is a big job for me in particular, and in particular on this project. So internals is going to be me checking in on making sure that I have done the internal connective work that will link the external story with my character's internal journey. For me, this is going to be increasing my character's inner thought processes and making sure that I'm showing on the page how they feel in response to things that are happening. Sometimes you'll have a character that does something or is talking to someone, and even though you're in their mind, you're not actually telling the reader what they think about the things that the other person is saying, how they feel about the things that the other person is doing or saying. And that internal conversation is very important for making the reader empathize and understand why the character is doing what they're doing, and to make them have an emotional connection and an emotional response to the character's situations. So this is going to be really important for me to check in on. I want to make sure that I am bringing forth all of the elements that I want to have come through the manuscript at this time. So this is when I'm going to check and make sure that if I'm writing a funny book, that it is funny. If I'm writing a sad book, then I want to make sure that the emotion is coming through the sadness. If this is a book about someone who is angry, I want to make sure that I'm explaining that anger. Whatever emotion is primary in your book, or the emotions that are secondary in your book, this is a great time to make sure they're actually coming through. And for this step, you really might need to bring in a reader or two at this phase. So if you are looking for that type of feedback, it can be very difficult at this point to get that feedback from yourself. So don't be afraid at this point to bring in a reader or two. I always try very hard to be careful about when I bring in readers and to not bring in too many at the same time. I've learned over the years that you only get a first read once, and it's very, very, very valuable, that first time read. So I like to make sure that I space out my readers so that I'm not having too many people giving me the same type of feedback and also ruining their first read through. Better for me to fix several things and then come back to them and ask new people to read so that I can see if I've effectively made those changes. Another thing on this particular part of the challenge is showing versus telling. This is when I'm going to make sure that I am showing most of the time, that I am actually showing what the characters are doing and feeling rather than telling. But I also think that there are some strategic places and reasons why you might want to be more specific about certain things that you tell. So I do not personally believe that it's 100% show and 0% tell, but I think it should be intentional. So I'm going to check my manuscript for the things that I should be telling readers and also for the things that I should be showing them. This is also when I'm going to check in on voices. This goes along with some of the things that we were talking about as far as secondary characters, but I want to make sure that all of the characters' voices in the story are distinct. So not just my main character's voice, but I want to make sure that the people around them also have very distinct voices and personalities, and that no one is a stand-in for anyone else. Every single line of dialogue should be so specific to that character's personality and voice that you could not just change the name on a speech tag and have it be someone else that's talking. it should be very specifically that character. And I think that's a very, very good test. If you could change the name and it would still be reasonably spoken by someone else, then perhaps the voice is not distinct enough. And that doesn't mean that every character needs to be like a caricature, but I do think that every character should have a very specific voice. I think that it's important that each character is unique because we are all unique. And I think that there's real value in that. And the last part of phase 3 is the word expectations. And this is something that we have definitely talked about in phase 1 and phase 2 before in some way or another. So this is when I want to make sure that I'm meeting reader expectations in some ways and that I'm circumventing their expectations in other ways. This is also a time for me to check my expectations and what I wanted for my book and making sure that it is there. I've already spoken about making passes through the book for key elements. In the book that I'm writing right now, I need to make a pass through the book to check for consistent humor. I need to make a pass through the book to check and make sure that I am being consistent with emotional connection and content. I need to do a pass to check for that internal conversation. I need to do a pass and check for certain information that's relevant to my story that I need to be spreading throughout. So I'm basically making sure that the things that I wanted my book to be are here. And this is a great time to go back and check the mission statement that you might have made for your project if you've been doing the Revise Along Challenge with me. This is when I'm going to go back and look at what I hoped to accomplish and make sure that it is exactly what I have done at this point in the game. So phase 3 can be quite a long process. The last phase is much more polishing type stuff. So phase 3 is where I'll be hanging out for several weeks as I brush through the manuscript and then go back to the beginning and brush through for something else and brush through. It's kind of like detangling. If you're a person with long hair, then you know that tangled hair is a mess. And sometimes our stories can have a little bit of a tangle at this time too. So I think about working through these tangles as individual passes and sweeps through my book. I don't think that it is efficient for me to move through the book checking for 5 things at once. So I have to move through the book checking for 1 thing at a time. And that process does slow things down, but I also think that it's more likely that I'm going to catch all the things that I want to catch. So thank you guys so much for joining me again on the Revise Along Challenge. I really hope that revisions are going well for you. And I really hope that if you are feeling alone in revisions, as solitary as this process can be, that you are following the hashtag Revise Along anywhere on your socials. I think it's a great hashtag. I feel very proud of this particular hashtag, and I really hope that people continue to use it even outside of this particular challenge. I think the idea of revise along with me has some, I don't know, I think it's got some good legs. So I want to thank you guys so much for your participation and for following along with me. As always, I hope that you will come and join me on Instagram or Twitter or wherever as Kels Not Chels, and please do leave a comment below and let me know where you are in the revisions process. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope that you have an amazing day, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.